Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the OnePlus 7 and see how this specific device holds up in 2023. Now, what's very funny is the OnePlus 7 was kind of the little brother to the OnePlus 7 Pro, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad deal at all. The OnePlus 7 Pro, easily one of my most favorite phones that have ever came out. Very capable, just very, very poetic, I think, in terms of what it brought. The OnePlus 7 was kind of almost like an iPhone 8 Plus. It really didn't get all the shine, when the, main successor came out, but it was still a pretty good phone. And I still look at a phone like the OnePlus 7, and I'm still very happy with it for the most part. Now, if you want to pick up some phones I would actually recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, first things first, the OnePlus 7 did come out in 2019, so this phone is quickly approaching almost 4 years old now, which is insane, because when you visually look at this phone, you probably wouldn't even think it's that old of a device. You'd probably think like, oh, it's probably like 2 years old or something, but for it to be almost 4 years old is pretty insane. I mean, this thing I think still kind of looks better than like an iPhone 14, at least on the front. So that's always something that kind of throws me off with some of these devices. Now with the OnePlus 7 on the front, you are getting a 6.41-inch optic AMOLED display. It's a 1080p panel, and it's a pretty good looking display. It is 60 Hz, so OnePlus did not put the 90 Hz panel on this display, which makes sense because they did add it. That was like one of the main flagship features for the OnePlus 7 Pro. Now the thing I liked about this phone more than the 7 Pro was that we actually didn't really have that, hole punch. Like we had like a, hole punch display kind of. It wasn't a hole punch. It was like that display came carved into the bottom. But the thing with the OnePlus 7 was that they actually ended up pretty much, not giving us that little pop-up at the top. So that was kind of the annoying thing. When OnePlus kind of came through and they gave us that little like pop-up hole punch display, and that kind of was a little bit of a problem with that motorized pop-up camera, mostly because, if it broke or something, that was kind of the issue that I was kind of getting there. Now with something like the OnePlus 7, it doesn't really seem like that's the case here, which is honestly very, very impressive. So I like this display a lot. I think it looked pretty good, and I didn't really have too much to complain about here, to be honest. On the bottom, we had a USB Type-C port, which was great. No headphone jack or anything like that, so it was a pretty basic phone when it kind of came down to it, to be honest. But still, it looked like a pretty good phone. On the back, we had a glass back, which was beautiful. There were no headphone jacks or micro SD card slots on this device either, which is not really a big deal, but that's basically what was going on with here. Now on the back, we did have a glass back on this device, which was very, very nice. I think it looked pretty good. There really wasn't too much to complain about there either. Now we also had a dual camera setup at the very top, which I think was pretty cool. We'll get into that in a second. And there were some things on this device that were kind of missing. So we were missing things like IP certification, which I think was a pretty big thing. How, a device manufacturer like OnePlus wasn't able to, put something like that on this device was pretty wild. We were also missing things like wireless charging on this device too, which kind of was a pretty big thing as well. So those types of things I think take a pretty big toll on a device like the OnePlus 7, but I still think this is a pretty impactful device when it comes down to it. I mean, I think it brought a lot of stuff to the table, and when compared against the 7 Pro, I think this thing still sits in a pretty good spot. So clearly it wouldn't be the first device I would recommend buying, but I still think it's quite up there in terms of the design of this specific device, and I do think it overall did look better, at least than its predecessor in my opinion. So from that perspective, that kind of covers it up there. Now on the camera side, this specific device, like I said, 48 megapixel wide angle camera and then a 5 megapixel depth camera. You also had a 16 megapixel wide angle camera on the front. Now the issue with this device for the most part was that for one, you were getting, 4K at 60 on the back, which is awesome. Those are great resolutions to film in. But on the front, with the 1080p, sensor, that's kind of, a lower resolution than what you'd expect nowadays. But on top of that, and this is kind of the big thing, when compared to pretty much all device manufacturers that have came out recently within the last few years, all of them have already upscaled up to, 4K at 60 on the front. I'm pretty sure within the next few years, we'll be at like around 8K. For some reason, OnePlus wants to say at, 1080p on the front, which I think is kind of a big issue. When you're getting a phone like a OnePlus 7, for example, you want it to have, a good sensor. And honestly, for that year, it's a decent sensor. For when it came out, it's totally okay. But I do think nowadays we have kind of become accustomed to higher quality lenses on the front. And I will say I would rather have a better front camera nowadays probably than a better back camera. And in this case, that's kind of exactly what was going on. So that's kind of the problem where we have with these types of devices where the cameras really aren't as great as they could be. So keep that in mind. Not the biggest deal in the world, but just one of those things to keep in mind. So in terms of the camera sensors on the back, even on the front, I just don't think it's that great of a quality, and there's definitely better sensors out there than you could buy even for this year. I mean, 2019, you had a lot of other devices you could probably pick up. So that kind of covers up that too. Now from the software and longevity portion, this is a great area with these types of devices. OnePlus made really, really good software that was built on Android. So you were getting Oxygen OS, which was awesome. And I really did like that version of Android a lot. But the thing is that, this phone has been, discontinued with software quite a bit. So that is kind of where some of these issues kind of arise at. Again, if you're going to want to get like the best version of software, Android is really good, but you're going to be getting better versions of software from something that is still supported with software. So like the OnePlus 10 and the OnePlus 9, I think still supported. The Pixels, those types of devices are still going to be supported. The OnePlus, 7 isn't supported with software natively, but you can always root this thing and custom ROM it if it's out there and available. But those things haven't really been as popular as they used to be. So that's kind of where we are with this specific device too. So keep that in mind, but that's kind of how I see this specific device as of now. It just doesn't have that much software, and it's not really worth buying because of the lack of software from that, situation as well. So keep that in mind, but that's kind of how I feel about this device from that perspective. Now, performance-wise, this phone had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 chipset. It also had an Adreno 640 GPU with 6 gigs of RAM on the base model, 8 gigs of RAM on the mid-tier model, and then 12 gigs of RAM on the top-tier model. So, I mean, I don't have to say this for you guys to understand, but this is a lot of RAM to have on a device like this. It is more than capable enough to be able to, handle everything you throw at it, which is beautiful. When you're getting a device like this, you're going to be getting a phone that is still fairly competitive from the RAM standpoint. And I think that's a really awesome thing. Now, when you look at this thing in terms of, the core performance that it has right now, it is kind of in a tricky situation, mostly because you are going to be getting a device that is kind of already outdated with software, and the chipset is already kind of outdated too. So those are the kinds of issues that we are kind of getting with this type of device, which does kind of suck in some ways. I mean, if you're getting a phone like this, you want it to have as great of a performance as it can. And in this case, I would still say the performance is decent. If you're doing like basic gaming, or even if you're doing like heavier intensive gaming, if you're doing like heavier intensive applications and those things, you're probably going to be okay. But it is, again, kind of when it comes down to those, heavier intensive things, that's where situations can start coming up where you kind of wish it had better performance and that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind, not the end of the world. But I will still say the performance of this phone is actually decent for how old this phone is. So in terms of this whole entire device, what I can tell you is, although this wouldn't be the first device I would recommend buying anymore, it's still kind of surprising. Like if you still have this device, I mean, it still might be somewhat relevant. Again, it wouldn't be a device I would go out of my way to recommend buying, to anybody, but it still has quite a bit of capability, and it's still up there in terms of just performance and raw power. But again, if you have the capability and if you have the resources, going up to something like a Pixel 6, an iPhone 13, a Galaxy S21, S22, those types of devices are going to be giving you a better overall experience than something like the OnePlus 7 in my opinion. So in that perspective, that kind of covers it up there as well. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.